The entire history of the Achaemenid Persians, Cyrus to Xerxes, and the First World Empire. Have you ever wondered how a small tribe of desert wanderers built the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen? Or how one man, born in obscurity, rose to command an empire stretching from the Aegean Sea to the mountains of India? Picture this: 550 BC, dust swirls across the Persian plateau. In the silence of dawn, a rider gallops toward a walled city bearing a message that will change history. Within weeks, kingdoms will fall, armies will surrender without battle, and a name, Cyrus, will echo across continents. Yet behind the glory lies a secret ambition: to build not just an empire of land, but an empire of hearts. This is the story of the Achaemenid Persians, visionaries, conquerors, and empire builders whose legacy shaped the idea of civilization itself. From the cunning diplomacy of Cyrus the Great, to the monumental ambitions of Darius, to the vengeance-fueled campaigns of Xerxes, this saga is filled with betrayal, brilliance, and blood. Stay till the end, because the Persian Empire didn't just rule the world, it invented it. The rise of the Persians, from shadows to sunrise. The story begins long before Cyrus wrote into history. In the heart of what is now southwestern Iran, the land of Parsa, or Persia, was a harsh and unforgiving place. Rocky plains, scattered oases, and distant mountain ranges framed a people forged by endurance. The Persians were not yet an empire. They were vassals, subjects of a greater power, the Medes, a formidable kingdom ruling the highlands to the north. But deep within this rugged land, a lineage stirred, the Achaemenids. They claimed descent from a mythical ancestor named Achaemenes, a name whispered with pride among tribal chiefs. From these beginnings would rise a dynasty that would redefine power itself. At this time, the Near East was a mosaic of kingdoms: Babylon, proud and ancient; Lydia, rich and cunning; Egypt, timeless and enigmatic; and the Medes, fierce masters of the Iranian plateau. The world had known great kings before: Sargon of Akkad, Hammurabi of Babylon, the pharaohs of the Nile, but none could imagine what was about to emerge from the Persian wilderness. Cyrus, son of Cambyses I, was born around 600 BC, according to legend. A dream foretold his destiny. The Median king Astyages, fearing the prophecy, ordered the infant's death. But fate had other plans. A humble herdsman saved the boy and raised him in secret. Years later, the young Cyrus would return, not as a servant, but as a conqueror. The air of the ancient East was thick with omens. Empires rose and fell like the tides of the Euphrates. Yet the Persians brought something new, a vision of rule through respect rather than terror. When Cyrus finally defied the Medes, it wasn't merely rebellion. It was destiny unfolding. The clash between Cyrus and Astyages was swift and decisive. Babylonian records later described the event in astonishment. The army of Astyages revolted and delivered him bound to Cyrus. It was not brute force that won the day, it was loyalty. Cyrus had inspired soldiers to fight for him, not just under him. That was the difference that made a shepherd's son into a king. When the Median capital, Ecbatana, fell, Cyrus did something extraordinary. He spared his defeated grandfather. The world watched in disbelief. Where other kings would have executed their foes, Cyrus offered forgiveness. It was a new kind of conquest, one that would become the foundation of his empire. But the Persians' rise was only beginning. Across the plains of Anatolia lay the glittering kingdom of Lydia, ruled by the fabulously wealthy Croesus. He was a man so rich that his name became a proverb: as rich as Croesus. Convinced that the gods favored him, he attacked Cyrus, hoping to crush this upstart before Persia grew too strong. The two armies met near Thymbra, under a sun that seemed to set the dust aflame. Croesus's army was mighty, his cavalry shining in gold, his chariots rumbling like thunder. Yet Cyrus, ever the strategist, did the unthinkable. He lined his front ranks with camels, whose stench and noise terrified the Lydian horses. In moments, the proud cavalry broke ranks. The Persians advanced, their discipline and cunning overwhelming the wealth of Lydia. When Sardis, the Lydian capital, fell, Cyrus again showed mercy. Croesus, captured and condemned to burn, was spared when a sudden rainstorm, or perhaps divine intervention, quenched the fire. From that day, the legend of Cyrus the merciful conqueror began to spread like wildfire. Soon, the Persians turned their eyes toward the greatest prize of all, Babylon, the city of gods and gardens. Babylon was the jewel of Mesopotamia, its walls so thick that chariots could race along their tops. No one had ever taken it by force. But Cyrus was not no one. He studied its defenses, its river, and most importantly, its people, oppressed by a king they despised, Nabonidus, who had angered the priests and neglected the sacred festivals. Under the cover of night, Cyrus's general Gobryas diverted the Euphrates River, lowering the water enough for soldiers to wade beneath the walls. Babylon fell without a fight. The people opened the gates to their liberator. Cyrus entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a deliverer. In the Cyrus Cylinder, often called the world's first charter of human rights, he declared, "I returned the displaced gods to their sanctuaries and restored the people to their homes." Among those restored were the Jews, exiled from Jerusalem decades earlier. Cyrus allowed them to return and rebuild their temple, an act that would earn him eternal honor in the Bible as the anointed of the Lord. The world had never seen such a conqueror, one who built with compassion as well as might. But as Cyrus's empire stretched from the Mediterranean to India, a question lingered like a shadow. How long could such mercy survive in a world ruled by ambition? As the great king marched eastward on his final campaign, he rode into the lands of the Massagetæ, fierce nomads beyond the Oxus River. Their queen, Tomarus, warned him not to advance. Cyrus ignored her. The battle was brutal, and for the first time, the Persians faltered. Cyrus the Great fell in the field, his empire mourning the man who had changed the world. Yet even in death, his dream endured. His body was laid to rest in a simple stone tomb at Pasargadae, still standing today. Silent, serene, eternal. And so ends the beginning of Persia, a nation born from dust and vision. But as history soon proved, what Cyrus built was not merely an empire, it was a blueprint for empire. Have you ever seen an empire stand on the edge of chaos, and instead of collapsing, rise higher than ever before? What happens when the death of a legend leaves behind a throne too vast for one man to control? When Cyrus the Great fell, the world held its breath. His vision had united nations, his justice had inspired conquered peoples, and his mercy had turned enemies into allies. But with his death, the empire he forged trembled. From the burning plains of Central Asia to the gardens of Babylon, whispers spread. Who would lead the world now? Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, inherited a throne unlike any ever known, stretching thousands of miles, rich in gold, talent, and danger. Yet power, as the Persians knew, was a double-edged sword. And Cambyses, unlike his father, wielded it with paranoia rather than wisdom. He set his sights on the one great prize that had eluded Cyrus, Egypt, the ancient kingdom of the Nile. Pharaoh Psammetichus III waited behind the high walls of Pelusium, trusting in the desert and the gods to protect him. But Cambyses was relentless. He marched his army across the Sinai, a deadly expanse of burning sand, where men collapsed beneath the sun. Then came the trick that would define the campaign. Knowing that the Egyptians worshipped cats as sacred, Cambyses ordered his soldiers to carry cats before them on their shields. The Egyptian archers, unwilling to harm their holy creatures, faltered. The Persians stormed the walls, and Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, fell. At first, the conquest seemed complete. But inside Cambyses's mind, shadows grew. He executed priests, nobles, even his own brother Smerdes, or thought he did. Some claimed that the real Smerdes had escaped, and a false Smerdes had taken his place. The empire began to murmur. Was the great king mad? In 522 BC, as Cambyses returned from Egypt, word reached him. Someone had seized his throne. The usurper called himself Bardia, claiming to be his slain brother. Cambyses, enraged, drew his sword, but fate intervened. As he mounted his horse, his blade slipped and pierced his thigh. Infection spread, and the son of Cyrus died in agony, whispering that Persia had fallen to deceit. For months, chaos reigned. Governors hesitated, armies divided, provinces rose in rebellion. The empire, so carefully built by Cyrus, seemed to unravel. Then, from the heart of the confusion, emerged a man whose name would reshape Persia's destiny. Darius. He was not the son of Cyrus nor of kings. He was a soldier, sharp, ambitious, and cunning, who claimed divine favor and royal lineage through the Achaemenid bloodline. His story began with one daring act, a coup at dawn. With 6 loyal nobles, he stormed the palace, confronted the impostor Smerdes, and slew him on the spot. When the dust settled, Darius stood as the chosen king, but legitimacy is not granted by blood alone. Across the empire, rival claimants rose, 9 rebels in 9 provinces, each declaring themselves ruler. Babylon defied him. Media, Elam, Parthia, all flared with revolt. Darius fought them one by one, each victory bought with cunning and brutality. He recorded these triumphs for eternity on the Behestan inscription, carved high into a mountain face. In elegant old Persian, he declared, "By the grace of Ahura Mazda, I am king." Imagine the scene: towering cliffs, soldiers scaling rock to carve the words of power into stone that would outlive empires. There, Darius told the world how he crushed the liars and restored order. And through his wars and reforms, something extraordinary began. The Persian Empire did not merely survive, it transformed. Darius was not content to inherit. He would create. Where Cyrus had conquered hearts, Darius conquered systems. He built an empire that could rule itself, a marvel of administration centuries ahead of its time. He divided Persia into satrapies, provinces governed by satraps, or protectors of the realm. Each satrap was powerful, but watched by royal inspectors, the eyes and ears of the king. No rebellion went unseen. Taxes flowed, roads stretched across mountains and deserts, and messages sped from one end of the world to the other. The jewel of this system was the royal road, a highway running from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia, more than 1,500 miles long. Couriers on horseback could carry royal orders across it in a week. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor darkness of night prevents them from completing their appointed course, wrote Herodotus, words still echoed today in the creed of postal carriers. Under Darius, the empire became more than a realm. It became an idea, unity in diversity, order in chaos, light against the shadow of disorder. He standardized coinage, the gold daric, stamped with the image of the bow-bearing king, and expanded trade across 3 continents. Yet not all was harmony. Even as Darius built, the seeds of defiance stirred to the west. The Greeks, proud and independent, had little love for foreign kings. When the Ionian cities of Asia Minor rebelled, they called upon their kin in Athens and Eretria for aid. Darius crushed the revolt, but the insult remained. He would not forget the day the Athenians dared to burn Sardis. He turned his gaze across the sea. "Who are these men of Athens?" he asked. "May Ahura Mazda grant me vengeance." Messengers were sent to demand submission, earth and water, the symbols of surrender. Most cities complied. Athens did not. Sparta did not. The great king prepared for war. In 490 BC, the Persian fleet sailed across the Aegean. It carried tens of thousands of warriors, Persians, Medes, Egyptians, and Scythians, all bound by the king's will. They landed at Marathon, 26 miles from Athens. The Greeks, vastly outnumbered, faced them on a narrow plain. The battle was short, brutal, and shocking. The Persians, confident in their superiority, were met with a charge that shattered their lines. The Greeks fought with ferocity, their hoplites pressing forward in bronze and sweat. When the dust cleared, the invincible army of Darius had been defeated. The news struck Persepolis like thunder. For the first time, Persia had failed. Darius was enraged, not merely at the loss, but at the audacity. Yet before he could march again, rebellion flared in Egypt. The empire demanded his presence elsewhere. Time, that most patient of enemies, slipped through his fingers as he prepared for another campaign. Age and illness took their toll. In 486 BC, Darius the Great, builder of roads, king of kings, architect of empire, died before he could avenge his pride. His body was entombed in a cliff at Nakshi-Rostam, his likeness carved in eternal triumph above the doorway, arms raised to heaven. But in death, he left behind more than an empire. He left a challenge. His son Xerxes, young, proud, and brilliant, would inherit a throne gilded with glory but burdened by vengeance. He had watched his father's rage smolder at the mention of Greece, and he swore that where Darius failed, he would conquer. The Persian court erupted in intrigue. Advisors whispered, generals plotted, priests invoked the gods. Some urged peace, others demanded war. Xerxes hesitated, until a dream, or perhaps a vision sent by Ahura Mazda, convinced him his destiny lay beyond the sea. He ordered the greatest army ever assembled. Rivers were diverted to water it. Mountains trembled at its march. Across Asia, men spoke of the King of Kings raising a host to humble the West. The empire's heart beat with the rhythm of war drums at the Hellespont. Engineers built 2 bridges of boats across the strait to Europe. When a storm destroyed them, Xerxes raged and ordered the sea itself whipped with chains, a gesture of defiance to nature itself. Then he built again. When the army crossed, it was said that the earth groaned under their weight. In that moment, the Persian Empire stood at its zenith, magnificent, immense, unstoppable. And yet, beneath the golden banners and the sound of marching feet, the first cracks of destiny began to form. Because across the sea, in the small, defiant cities of Greece, men were sharpening their spears, not for conquest, but for freedom. The world's greatest empire was about to meet a people who would rather die than kneel. The age of Cyrus had built the empire. The reign of Darius had perfected it. But under Xerxes, Persia would test its own limits and discover that even empires forged in glory must face the fire of destiny. Have you ever seen a king who believed he could command the sea, silence the wind, and bend nations to his will? What happens when the most powerful man on earth dares to defy not just his enemies, but fate itself? The sun blazed across the royal pavilion at Persepolis, its golden reliefs gleaming like fire. Xerxes I, son of Darius the Great, sat upon the lion throne of Persia. Around him, courtiers whispered in awe and fear. He was young, towering, broad-shouldered, with eyes that could turn from warmth to wrath in a heartbeat. Before him lay maps of the known world, and on those maps, the word Greece burned like a challenge. For 10 years, the Greeks had lived under the shadow of their defiance at Marathon. They had dared to strike the empire that ruled from the Nile to the Indus. To Xerxes, their survival was an insult to his father's legacy, a wound in the empire's pride. He would heal it, not with words, but with the greatest invasion the ancient world had ever seen. Messengers galloped through Asia, bearing the king's decree. Every satrapy, every vassal kingdom was to send men, horses, ships, gold. The call went out from the mountains of Persia to the sands of Egypt, from the valleys of India to the shores of the Aegean. The result was an army so vast that its numbers blurred into legend. Some said over 1,000,000 soldiers. Herodotus wrote that when they marched, rivers ran dry. But even an empire needs a vision. And Xerxes had one, not of conquest alone, but of destiny. He saw himself as chosen by Ahura Mazda, the divine guardian of truth, to bring order to a chaotic world. Greece was not merely a battlefield. It was a test of divine will. Before his army set out, Xerxes visited his father's tomb at Naxirostum. There, under the carved figure of Darius, he made an oath. "Father," he whispered, "I will avenge you. I will bring Greece beneath the shadow of Persia." Then came the march, an ocean of men and beasts moving westward, banners snapping in the wind. In the Persian heartland, peasants knelt as the army passed. In Lydia, merchants watched their towns empty. In Thrace, the forest shook with the sound of drums and marching feet dotted the Hellespont, the narrow strait between Asia and Europe. Xerxes faced the first trial of his ambition. 2 massive bridges of boats had been constructed to carry his army across. But a storm rose suddenly, smashing them to pieces. In fury, Xerxes commanded that the sea itself be punished. His men whipped the waves with chains and branded the waters with red-hot irons, crying out that the King of Kings had conquered even the tempest. Then, unshaken, he built again. The bridges were remade stronger than before. And when the first ranks of soldiers stepped onto them, Xerxes stood upon a hill and watched his empire cross from one continent to another, from Asia into Europe. But beyond those waters lay Greece, small, divided, defiant. City-states like Athens and Sparta, rivals in everything except their hatred of tyranny. They had no empire, no vast army, no divine kings. What they had was something Persia did not understand, an unbreakable will to remain free. As Xerxes advanced, he expected submission. Many cities did bow, offering earth and water. But in the south, at Sparta, the kings refused. Their answer was simple: "If you want our submission, come and take it." The Greek resistance gathered at a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. There, King Leonidas of Sparta, with only 300 of his warriors and a few thousand allies, stood to block the road. Xerxes could not believe it. 300 men against the might of Persia? It was laughable. The first Persian assaults came like waves, fierce, disciplined, unstoppable. But the Greeks fought in the shade, shoulder to shoulder, their spears thrusting, their shields unbroken. The narrow pass neutralized the Persian advantage. Day after day, the Spartans held. When a Greek traitor revealed a hidden path around the mountains, the Persians finally outflanked them. Leonidas dismissed most of his allies, staying behind with his 300 and a handful of others. Surrounded, he fought to the last breath. When the last Spartan fell, the Persians stood amid heaps of their dead. Xerxes, though victorious, had lost tens of thousands, and learned that courage could wound even the invincible. The road to Athens lay open. The Persians swept south, burning cities that resisted. When they reached Athens, they found it deserted. The people had fled to the nearby island of Salamis. Furious, Xerxes ordered the Acropolis burned, the temples razed, the city reduced to ashes. Smoke curled into the sky, black and terrible, the symbol of vengeance complete. But in his triumph, Xerxes made a fatal error. Themistocles, the cunning Athenian commander, sent him a message, a deception. He claimed the Greeks were fleeing and urged Xerxes to strike at once. The king took the bait. His fleet surged into the narrow straits of Salamis, confident of crushing the enemy. At dawn, as the Persian ships crowded the channel, the Greeks struck. Their smaller, faster triremes rammed the lumbering Persian vessels, splintering wood and drowning men by the hundreds. Xerxes watched from a golden throne on the shore, his expression shifting from pride to horror as his mighty fleet was destroyed before his eyes. The empire that had conquered Babylon and Egypt had been humbled by fishermen, Farmers and philosophers, Xerxes. Shaken, retreated to Asia, leaving the general, Mardonius, to finish the war. But Mardonius fell at Plataea, and with him died Persia's dream of Europe. The invasion, the greatest in antiquity, ended not in victory, but in retreat. Yet this was no simple defeat. For Xerxes, it was the moment the divine plan cracked. In his palaces at Susa and Persepolis, surrounded by gold and luxury, he became restless, haunted by failure. The king who had once ruled the world now stared into the silence of his own power. In time, that silence turned to suspicion. Courtiers conspired, eunuchs whispered, generals plotted. Xerxes withdrew into the inner palace, consumed by paranoia. His once brilliant reign dimmed to darkness. He expanded the empire's monuments, vast palaces, jeweled halls, and endless reliefs showing him victorious. But behind the splendor lay emptiness. In 465 BC, fate came again for the King of Kings. One night, as he slept, his own guards turned against him. Artabanus, the head of his bodyguard, entered his chamber and struck him down. Thus ended the reign of Xerxes, the man who had challenged the gods, crossed the sea, and brought the greatest empire of its age to the brink of ruin. But Persia did not fall with him. From the shadows emerged his son, Artaxerxes I, young, uncertain, but determined to hold together what his father had nearly lost. The empire was still vast, its wealth unmatched, its people loyal, for now. Yet something had changed forever. The Persians had learned that not even the King of Kings could command destiny. In the years that followed, the empire turned inward. Rebellions smoldered, temples rose, and trade flowed, but the fire of conquest had cooled. Across the sea, Greece began to rise, its philosophers and generals sharpening ideas that would soon cut deeper than any sword. And in the heart of Persia, the palaces stood silent, their walls whispering of what had been and what was yet to come. Because empires do not die in a single night. They fade, one dream at a time, but even as the sun set on Xerxes' glory, a new dawn waited far to the west, a boy yet unborn, destined to bring the empire of the Persians to its knees. Have you ever watched a giant slowly crumble, not with an explosion, but with a whisper? What happens when a world built on gold, roads, and glory begins to rot from within? When Xerxes I fell beneath the blade of betrayal, the empire he had commanded seemed, at first, unshaken. Its banners still flew from Egypt to India. Its satraps still governed vast lands. Its armies still obeyed the great king's command. But in the silent corridors of Persepolis, something had changed. The spell was broken. The aura of divine invincibility that had once cloaked the Persian throne began to fade. The young Artaxerxes I inherited his father's empire in blood and confusion. His first act as king was vengeance. Artabanus, the traitor who had murdered Xerxes, was hunted down and slain. The court, once the heart of Persian unity, now seethed with intrigue. Brothers, nobles, and generals whispered in the shadows. The empire's throne, once a symbol of strength, had become a prize in a deadly game. But Artaxerxes was no fool. He understood that where the sword could not rule, the pen and the coin must. His reign, though less flamboyant than his father's, was shrewd and stabilizing. He rebuilt temples, restored roads, and continued the delicate balance between tolerance and authority that had made Persia great. Yet far beyond the royal palaces, the world was shifting. Greece, that stubborn land of mountain cities and restless minds, had found its voice. The wars of resistance against Xerxes had transformed into a new era of pride. Athens had risen like a phoenix, leading a league of city-states in what they called freedom. But freedom has a cost, and soon Greeks turned their swords upon one another. The Peloponnesian War consumed them for decades. From Persepolis, Persian satraps watched closely. They saw an opportunity. If the Greeks wished to destroy each other, Persia would be happy to pay for the swords. Gold flowed from the east into the hands of Athenian and Spartan envoys. Persian diplomats whispered in both ears, funding one side today, the other tomorrow. It was the perfect revenge, subtle, quiet, devastating. The empire that had failed to conquer Greece by force now conquered it through politics. Still, beneath this clever diplomacy, Persia's heart grew heavy. The royal bloodline began to splinter. After Artaxerxes' death, succession became a river of blood. Sons murdered fathers, brothers turned on brothers, generals declared themselves kings. The throne changed hands faster than the ink could dry on royal decrees. Darius II, once a minor prince, seized power amid this chaos. His rule was harsh and suspicious. He crushed rebellions, yes, but every victory cost trust. The satraps, those governors who ruled the empire's far corners, grew too powerful. They collected taxes, commanded armies, and began to think of themselves as kings in all but name. When Darius II died, his son Artaxerxes II inherited not an empire of unity, but a web of rivals. And the first challenge to his rule came not from a foreign power, but from his own brother, Cyrus the Younger. Cyrus was everything a Persian noble admired: bold, fearless, ambitious. As a satrap in Asia Minor, he had won the loyalty of soldiers and Greeks alike. When his brother became king, Cyrus refused to kneel. He gathered a mercenary army, 10,000 hardened Greek hoplites, and marched east to seize the throne. It was the perfect storm. Brother against brother, east against west, Persia against itself. The two armies met at Cunaxa near Babylon. In 401 BC, the Greeks fought with unmatched discipline, cutting through Persian lines like bronze thunder. For a moment, victory seemed certain. Then Cyrus charged directly at his brother and fell. Struck down amid the chaos, the rebellion ended in that instant. But the Greeks, stranded deep within enemy territory, began a retreat that would echo through history. Their march northward through deserts, mountains, and hostile lands was immortalized by the soldier and writer Xenophon as the Anabasis. The march up country. The image of 10,000 disciplined Greeks cutting their way home through the heart of Persia terrified future generations. It revealed a terrible truth. The empire was vast, but not invulnerable. Under Artaxerxes II, the empire limped onward. He ruled for 40 years, long enough to see Persia meddle once more in Greek affairs, funding Sparta to weaken Athens, then supporting Athens to counter Sparta. The old Persian policy of divide and rule was alive and well. But within its own borders, the empire was rotting. Corruption bled through the bureaucracy. Satraps hoarded taxes meant for the royal treasury. Armies rebelled when unpaid. Even the once great postal system, the pride of Darius, began to falter. By the time Artaxerxes III came to power, Persia's glory was a flickering flame in the wind. Yet Artaxerxes III was a man of iron. He crushed revolts with brutal efficiency. Egypt, long lost, was reconquered. Governors who defied him were executed without mercy. For a moment, it seemed Persia might rise again. But then, as always, the poison of ambition returned. He was murdered by his own eunuch and general, Pagoas, who placed puppet kings on the throne like pieces on a chessboard. When Darius III finally rose to power, the empire was a shadow of itself. Still vast, still rich, but hollow. Its armies were grand in number, but weak in spirit. Its leaders mistrusted each other more than the enemy. The roads still shone, the palaces still dazzled, but beneath the marble, cracks ran deep. And while Persia looked inward, the world beyond its western border was changing. In the rugged hills of Macedon, a young prince was learning the art of war from his father and the art of ambition from his own heart. His name was Alexander. Darius III, proud yet untested, dismissed the boy at first. Macedon, a kingdom of shepherds. But Alexander was no ordinary prince. When his father, Philip II, united Greece under his rule, Alexander inherited not just an army, but a dream, to lead that army east, into the lands of Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes. To do what no Greek had ever done, to bring Persia to its knees. In 334 BC, the dream began. Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the same water Xerxes had bridged nearly 150 years before. As his ships landed, he threw a spear into the soil and declared, "I accept Asia as a gift from the gods." The clash was inevitable, the young lion against the aging giant. At Granicus, the Persians met him with cavalry and pride. They fell. At Issus, Darius himself led his armies. Again, Persia was broken. The great king fled, leaving his family behind, a humiliation no Persian ruler had ever endured. For 2 years, Alexander cut through Asia like fire through silk. He captured cities, seized treasuries, and won the loyalty of satraps who once swore to Darius. The Persian army, scattered and demoralized, could not match his speed or his genius. Finally, at Gaugamela in 331 BC, the two kings met for the last time. Darius commanded an army 5 times the size of Alexander's. Tens of thousands of men, scythed chariots, elephants. But numbers could not win what courage had already lost. When the battle began, Alexander rode straight for the heart of the Persian line, breaking it apart in a storm of spears and dust. Darius fled once more, and the empire of Cyrus the Great, the world's first true superpower, shattered forever. The Persians had ruled the world for more than 2 centuries. They had built roads that never slept, palaces that touched the heavens, and laws that bound nations together. But in the end, it was not foreign armies that doomed them. It was the slow decay of their own greatness. As Alexander marched into Persepolis, the jewel of Persia, he stood before the grand stairways and reliefs of kings long gone. That night, fire consumed the palace of Xerxes. Whether by accident, revenge, or divine irony, the flames lit the sky, the same sky under which Cyrus had dreamed of unity. The empire of the Achaemenids was gone. But its spirit, its idea of law, tolerance, and administration, lived on, shaping the empires that followed: Macedon, Rome, Byzantium, even the caliphates to come. Yet the story is not over. For even in defeat, Persia did not die. It merely changed its name, its rulers, and its dreams. And from those ashes would rise new dynasties, new kings, and a civilization that refused to vanish. Have you ever wondered what happens to an empire after its fall? When the banners are lowered, the kings are gone, and the palaces lie in ashes, does the story truly end, or does it begin anew? When Alexander the Great stood amid the burning ruins of Persepolis, the world believed the age of Persia was over. The Achaemenid Empire, that vast tapestry of nations, faiths, and roads, had fallen. But history has a strange habit. Empires die, yet their ideas survive, woven into the civilizations that follow. And Persia, more than any empire before it, had planted its spirit deep in the roots of human history. In the years after Darius III's death, Alexander sought to become not the destroyer of Persia, but its heir. He adopted Persian dress, Persian customs, and even Persian courtiers. He married Roxana, a noblewoman of the East, and encouraged his officers to take Persian wives as well. To his Macedonian soldiers, this was betrayal, but to Alexander, it was destiny fulfilled. He didn't want to erase Persia. He wanted to fuse it with Greece into something greater, a single, united world. As he traveled eastward, through Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and into the mountains of Bactria, Alexander began to see himself as a new Cyrus. He even restored temples the Persians had once built, ordered prayers to Ahura Mazda, and ruled with the same policy of tolerance that had made Cyrus beloved. The conqueror had become the student of the conquered, but like every mortal who defied limits, Alexander's body broke before his vision did. In 323 BC, he died in Babylon, not yet 33. His empire, too vast for one man to hold, fractured overnight. His generals carved it into kingdoms, each fighting the other for control. In Persia, Seleucus I Nicator emerged victorious, founding the Seleucid Empire, a Greek dynasty that ruled the Persian heartland for nearly 2 centuries. Yet the Greeks, for all their brilliance, were outsiders. They built cities in Persian style, minted coins with Persian symbols, and spoke of the great king, yet they could never fully claim the land they ruled. The Persian soul endured beneath the marble of Greek palaces and the echo of foreign tongues. By the 3rd century BC, local dynasties rose again, the Parthians, fierce horsemen from the Iranian steppe. They overthrew the Seleucids and reclaimed Persia's identity. Their empire, stretching from the Euphrates to the Indus, revived many of the Achaemenid traditions, satrapies, royal roads, tolerance for different religions. The Parthians ruled not as imitators of Greece, but as heirs of Cyrus. Centuries later, another dynasty would take the torch, the Sassanids, proclaiming themselves the direct successors of the Achaemenids. Their kings, like Artaxerxes I and Shapur the Great, looked back to the carvings at Persepolis for inspiration. They revived Zoroastrianism as the state religion and rebuilt the Persian sense of destiny. When the Romans called them the New Persians, they were not wrong. The empire of Cyrus had been reborn, and even after the Sassanids fell to the Arab conquests in the 7th century AD, Persia's legacy did not fade. It simply transformed into language, art, and philosophy. Persian poets like Ferdowsi, Rumi, and Hafez carried the fire of their ancestors in verses that still burn bright. Their words celebrated not the power of kings, but the endurance of the Persian spirit, the belief that civilization, wisdom, and beauty are the truest forms of empire. It's easy to measure the Achaemenids by their conquests, the cities they took, the lands they ruled, the monuments they built. But their true legacy lies elsewhere. They created the first great administrative state, an empire not held together by terror, but by organization, diplomacy, and shared prosperity. Their postal roads and taxation systems became models for Rome, Byzantium, and even modern governance. Their concept of human rights, embodied in the Cyrus cylinder, echoes through the ages. Often called the world's first declaration of freedom, when Cyrus allowed exiled peoples to return home, when he spared conquered kings, when he declared that no one should be oppressed for their faith, he introduced something revolutionary to history, the idea that empire could serve rather than enslave. And that idea survived every fall, every fire, every invader. Stand today at Pasargadae, before the simple stone tomb of Cyrus. There are no gold statues, no armies, no banners. Just the wind and a small inscription that reads, "Oh man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, I am Cyrus, who founded the empire. Do not begrudge me this piece of earth that covers my body." It's humble, human, and that humility, rare among conquerors, is what made Cyrus great. For he understood something that many who came after him did not: that the power to rule means nothing without the wisdom to let others live in peace. From his vision came the first blueprint for global unity, one that would inspire countless empires after his, from the Romans to the Ottomans, and even modern nations that seek to bridge cultures rather than divide them. The very concept of tolerance, of administration over conquest, traces its lineage back to the Persians. So, was the Achaemenid Empire truly gone when Persepolis burned? Or did it simply pass into memory, into law, art, religion, and philosophy, living on in ways that swords could never destroy? Because that's the secret history rarely told. Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, they were not just kings. They were architects of an idea that humanity could be governed not merely by fear, but by justice. And while their palaces turn to dust, that idea still stands. As the camera of time pulls back, the ruins of Persepolis fade into the desert sunset, and from those stones, we can still hear the echo of a civilization that once dared to call itself the world's first empire. The Persians may have fallen, but their dream of unity through respect, of strength through wisdom, remains immortal. And perhaps that, more than conquest or crown, is the truest kind of eternity.